On the New Development Bank, we are joined by Ravi Ramamurti. He's the Director of Center for Emerging Markets at Northeastern University. Good to see you, sir. Thank you for joining us. Let's talk about the bank, because a lot is being made about whether or not there's space for all these banks, and I suppose what I've heard arguments on both sides. I want to get your thoughts whether or not there is room for everybody.
Absolutely. If you look at the total needs of the region, some people estimate that these countries just in Asia are going to require something like $7 or $8 trillion over a 10-year period. And the combined capital of all of the existing institutions is not sufficient to meet that need. So yes, there is a need for another bank or two.
And often a lot is made about competition versus collaboration. I'm assuming that you believe they can all collaborate on deals around the world, right? Because there's more banks, that means more deals potentially could get funded.
Yes, I do think that they will collaborate. I mean, there was a competitive element to the creation of the NDB and the AIIB. There's no question. The emerging markets were feeling that their voice was not being heard in the existing fora of the other banks, whether it's the ADB or the World Bank. So they've made that point, and I think they intend to push forward with projects through these two banks. But they will work in partnership with other existing banks, because the needs are so enormous. But it's still possible that
The BRICS Bank and the AIIB, okay, so they basically are going to have a different area where they're going to invest in. But I'm curious, compare that with sort of the older school model. Is there a difference in how they're going to actually fund the loans? I mean, what is the operational difference?
No, in fact, the model is very similar to that of the other existing banks in the sense that a bunch of countries will put in some money, not all of the $100 billion, for instance, that everybody's talking about. They will put in about 20% of that, and the rest will be callable funds that will be called upon if required. Then the banks will go out and raise money in the capital markets. Now, it's not clear exactly where these two banks, the new banks, will raise their money, but the idea is to leverage the backing of the governments to be able to raise money in private markets and then lend that at relatively lower rates to member countries for very large and important infrastructure projects.
So the way I hear this sounds awfully similar to the private equity world, right? Except it's subsidized by governments. So when they say, I'm going to throw in 20 billion, they're really only putting in 2 billion, and the other 18 billion, we're going to get friends and family to sort of get involved in the deal. Am I right?
Yes, I mean, that is the basic idea, that you leverage the private markets. Now, in this particular case, given that China is also looking to develop its own financial markets, and the fact that both banks are headquartered in China, one in Shanghai, one in Beijing, I think the banks can be used to build the financial sector within China. Now, how that will affect the nature of the borrowing by the banks and the nature of the lending by these banks is an open question. They may indeed be different from each other. But let's not forget that the two banks are also quite different from each other, the AIIB and the NDB. The AIIB, to start with, is a bigger bank. I mean, its capital is going to be $100 billion already in place versus $50 billion for the NDB. It has more members. The AIIB already has 57 countries signed up to be members of the bank. The BRICS Bank, or what we call the New Development Bank, has only 5 countries as members. And in addition to that, you have the fact that the Asian Infrastructure Bank says explicitly that it's focused on Asia.
Professor, Professor, I apologize, we're up against the clock, but I want to squeeze one more question in here. The type of projects that this money is going to fund, give us a few examples.
Well, I think it's going to be very similar to the kinds of projects that are always funded by the other development banks. It's likely that there will be large projects. They're going to be in the infrastructure sector only, unlike the other banks which also support investments in other sectors. So the sectoral focus is going to make them a little different. Now, they have said that they will be more sensitive to the needs of the developing countries because they're controlled by the developing countries. That remains to be seen. Exactly what form that will take remains to be seen. And that ties into how the bank is going to raise money in capital markets. If you raise the money through private capital markets, in very much the way that the other banks have done, the World Bank and the Asian Development Bank and so on, there will be pressure on these banks as well to look at the commercial performance of their portfolio.
Well,
so their ability to stray too far from.
I'll end it there because we're out of time. Ravi Ramamurti, I'll just say that a little competition is always good. Thank you for your time and explaining this to us.